Virginia gerrymandering, or redistricting. Now, yesterday's special election was a narrow win for Democrats who redrew the congressional map to give Democrats 4 additional seats in the U.S. Congress. Now, this followed redistricting in several states after President Trump urged Republicans to redraw congressional maps in their states to prevent a Democrat House majority after the midterms. Now, this caused Democrats to take up redistricting in special elections, and it was back and forth with payback after payback, with maps redrawn in California, Utah, Texas, Missouri, North Carolina, Ohio, and now Virginia. Virginia Democrats were 6-5 over Republicans in the House of Representatives, but after yesterday's special election, with maps redrawn by the Democrat majority in Virginia's state legislature, if voting patterns hold, it's now 10-1, 10 Virginia Democrats to just 1 Virginia Republican in the House of Representatives, assuming that voters in Democrat districts continue to vote Democrat. Now, this is despite Republican voters turning out yesterday in droves, as they say, but came up just short of overtaking Democrats who always squash the early voting. And nationwide, that's just always the case. Now, former Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin was a major part of getting out the vote. Now, he thanked everyone for turning out and said, "The fight now turns to the courts." Now, at this point, it seems the Virginia Supreme Court ultimately will be the arbiter of whether the redrawn maps stand or will be struck down. Now, it depends on how the redistricting is framed for the courts. Partisan gerrymandering is a non-justiciable political question under the U.S. Constitution, but racial gerrymandering violates the Equal Protection Clause and will be struck down. Now, the gray area is when partisan gerrymandering coincidentally creates a racial gerrymander. Now, not done on purpose, but having that effect. Now, a racial gerrymander case will be decided by the U.S. Supreme Court. And there's another factor. Now, this term, the U.S. Supreme Court is considering 2 consolidated cases, Louisiana versus Calais and Robinson versus Calais. These cases are concerned with Louisiana's 2024 redrawn maps, which created a second majority African American district. Now, do the facts in these cases indicate an unconstitutional racial gerrymander or a remedy under the Voting Rights Act necessary to prevent dilution of the African American vote? Now, the Voting Rights Act is major civil rights legislation. Regardless of the outcome, we'll probably get guidance from the U.S. Supreme Court about Voting Rights Act remedies regarding vote dilution. Now, some legal scholars have analyzed that very issue as whether we examine a Voting Rights Act violation from the perspective of the process or the outcome, because we can put a process in place designed to achieve a free and fair election, but what if the outcome doesn't look free and fair? Now, for instance, former Governor Youngkin, whom I was just talking about, has said that 10-1, okay, 10 Virginia Democrats over 1 Virginia Republican in the House of Representatives does not reflect Virginia. And the issue for Virginia courts is whether the redrawn maps violate Virginia law, which has established a bipartisan redistricting commission. The problem is that Virginia's Democrat-led state legislature bypassed the redistricting commission and redrew the maps to create a putative 10-1 Democrats over Republicans in the House. So it's a major issue for the Virginia courts to decide. Meanwhile, Florida might redraw maps before the midterm elections in November. Earlier calls for redistricting were also considered in Louisiana, Colorado, Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Maryland, and New York, but didn't gain traction. Now, that could change before the midterm elections. Now, regardless, after Virginia's special election result yesterday, if voting patterns hold, Democrats would have a 2-seat majority in the House of Representatives after the midterms. Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis is seeking to flip 3 seats in Florida's representation in the House, which would restore the majority to Republicans by 1 vote. So, President Trump had called for redistricting to avoid the midterm curse. Now, that's a political phenomenon in which the president's party almost always loses seats in Congress in the midterm elections. Now, the president says he wants to avoid being impeached again since the House has the power to impeach. Regardless, impeachment wouldn't be a foregone conclusion. Now, under the Constitution, impeachment is reserved for high crimes and misdemeanors and not to be used for partisan maneuvering. Now, that cheapens the impeachment power. For instance, if articles of impeachment are filed by a House member because of, say, a disagreement with the president on policy, even a strong disagreement, that type of thing violates the separation of powers, in my view, although there's no judicial remedy for it. Now, impeachment is a non-justiciable political question. The courts cannot act as an appellate court to challenge an impeachment proceeding or conviction, as established in the case of Nixon v. United States. Now, not involving Richard Nixon, but Walter Nixon, a federal judge who was impeached after his felony conviction for making false statements to a grand jury. Now, Judge Nixon challenged his Senate impeachment trial. Ultimately, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the Constitution gives the Senate the sole power to try any impeachments. It's a political proceeding, not judicial, that is to say. So, as I mentioned, no judicial remedy, even for an unjust impeachment proceeding. On the political remedy, however, the issue is whether we the people want our tax dollars spent on a partisan, unjust impeachment proceeding. Now, some voters do, okay? They want the spectacle, the entertainment value of an impeachment proceeding. Now, of course, I believe that that's pathetic, but there are all types of people out there. They don't care about cheapening the impeachment power. They don't care about reserving that type of penalty for genuinely harmful misconduct that degrades our nation. For example, Bill Clinton abused his power to carry on a sexual affair in the White House with an intern, Monica Lewinsky. His sexual harassment of a volunteer aide at the White House as well, Kathleen Willey. His undisclosed sexual harassment of Paula Jones and a sexual assault of Juanita Broaddrick during his political career. All of his victims were women who had no power compared to Bill Clinton. His misconduct degraded our nation. He targeted his victims because of their comparative lack of power, no different from any sex offender. He counted on the fact that the victims would not be believed. Now, we witnessed recently the tragic murder-suicide of Virginia's former Lieutenant Governor, Justin Fairfax, and his wife. He killed her then himself. Now, it was domestic violence. In recent years, too, women had come forward to accuse Justin Fairfax of sexual assault. Now, sex offenders are extremely dangerous and have no place in electoral politics. As taxpayers, we obviously don't want to pay people like that to flout their crimes in all of our faces. People like Eric Swalwell and Bill Clinton, for example. Now, he's hoping Hillary will be elected president in 2028 so he can make a triumphant return to the White House. Now, I hope the Democrats don't sink that low and send him back to the White House. It would degrade our nation and it would inspire abusers everywhere to come out of the woodwork because it would send the message that sex offenses have no repercussions for the offenders. The misconduct will continue if we, the taxpayers, tolerate it. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and don't forget to subscribe.